Hey everyone, welcome back to another Tic Tac Taiko. This is my second of a two-part mini-series in home taiko practice. The first part I talked about the mindset and motivation of practicing taiko at home. This week I'm going to talk about equipment, specifically what I use, what I recommend, what I don't recommend, and why. See you after the intro. Before we get into the fun stuff, I want to say two things. One of them, you know what's coming, but the second one is new, specific for this video. If you can, if it's possible, I really highly recommend buying directly from the manufacturer or at least from a direct reseller, like a music store. I'm lucky enough that within 2 miles, maybe 3 miles of my location, there are 2 music stores on the same street of each other, but I realize not everyone has that fortune. I do recommend, if you want to do research on which model or which brand to use, absolutely do it on Amazon. There's a lot of information there. But when possible, go to that manufacturer, even if it means you have to make an account. It's annoying, I know, but people like you and me are the reason why these places stay in business and why there's not just one place and one organization where we have to do all of our shopping. Support your local and not so local retailers. As for the second thing, if you can, hit that like button. If you haven't subscribed yet, let YouTube know this is good content that you want to see more of so more people in the taiko community can find it as well. And on to the equipment. We'll start this video by talking about what I hit on, then what I hit with, and then everything else. First up, drum pads. The majority of my home practice uses drum pads. Yes, I have a Taiko-1. Yes, I have a timbre taiko, but the drum pads are convenient. They take no setting up and they're always ready to play. This main drum pad I have is called a real feel. I have no idea how common this is. I have no idea if it's a real feel because they're talking about Western percussion. I do not have enough experience on a snare or a tom to tell you if it is a real feel. But for taiko practice, whatever this is made of is wonderful. It's not too hard, it's not too soft. It gives to take a lot of the force and it pushes back to give a lot of recoil, which is great. If you're playing something like on a pillow or something soft, you may not get that recoil, and that is a huge, huge part of taiko technique. Something really worth mentioning is that I have had this pad for over 20 years, and it shows hardly any sign of wear and tear. There's a little bit of discoloration. You can see it maybe right around here. Where I play is more white, and what I'm not playing so much is more orange. That's it. This is the original color. Since this is a home practice thing, I don't care what it looks like, but there's no tearing, there's no splintering. The edges of the pad show no wear. The edges of the wood shows no wear. And so if I'm going to endorse something, I'm going to endorse this material and this brand, Real Feel. If you can pick up a Real Feel pad, probably going to get a lot of use out of it. As for smaller drum pads, I'm not going to go through, oh, this is this brand, because they're all about the same. The thing that I mentioned in one of my earliest videos is it's kind of funny how I have 4 drum pads, 4 different colors, 4 different shapes, and 4 different tones. And actually, I think that was a good idea, even though it was not something that I intended to do by any means. When I am playing multiple drum pads, I can easily see where is what. This bright red one is super easy to spot. So if I put it off to the side, I don't have to look at it. I can see it with peripheral vision. It's actually a really good thing. And having different tones and different feels is kind of nice. Kind of makes things more fun when I'm practicing even a simple drill. Now, in general, with drum pads, small or large, there are some that have different features than others. I believe this one has a secondary side, which is much harder. I find no use for this. I thought it might be cool, but it's not for taiko playing. Hitting this is going to hurt my bachi, so I pretty much just stick to the softer side. Some of the circular drum pads may have a slight rim, a raised little edge around the surface of the drum, and this is great to practice rim shots for Western percussion, not something that taiko players want. If you hit that rim, especially on the other side with all the force and all the energy of a bachi, you're going to break something, you're going to dent something, and you're going to have a very ugly looking drum pad that you can probably still use. But better yet, don't get one with a rim. Now, different drum pads are going to come in different weights. Like this one is pretty lightweight compared to this one, which is much heavier for its size, it may not matter that much, but you do have to factor that small ones are going to move around a lot more than big ones, depending on what you put them on. And we'll talk more about that later in this video. I personally do not like the tire drums for home practice. I do think they are a great idea. And if you're using them, great. But me personally, they take up a lot of room. They're bulky, they're hard to maneuver. It's hard to get them at an angle that works for me. And drum pads are small, light, easy to maneuver, and I can find more surfaces to put them on so that I can play them at a better height for me. As for what else I hit on, we have the Cadon Timbre Taiko and the Roland Taiko-1. Now, I did a long video just on comparing and contrasting the two of these. I'm not going to talk a lot about their features here, but I will link to that video because it is a very popular video and it's one of the most useful ones I have on this channel. Now, I have to admit, I have not used the Timbre Taiko in quite a while. It has nothing to do with the Timbre Taiko itself. I used to compose my own music for my videos, and that was taking a lot of time. And I stopped doing it. I started using free source music. But when I was recording it, I was using a Timbre Taiko to do so. And once I got my Taiko-1, I realized it benefited my style of practice more than the Timbre Taiko, and I stopped using this altogether. But again, it's not a critique of the Timbre Taiko. It's simply my style of practice and what fits me better. One thing I do need to say about the Taiko-1 that can't just be unique to me, but maybe it is. Sometimes I don't turn it on. I play it as a dead instrument. I'm just using it so I have something to hit, and I'm practicing body mechanics. I'm understanding what my body and my arms are doing, and I care less about the dynamics that my taiko is making. Okay, so I've talked about what I hit on. Now I'm going to talk about what I hit with, and this won't take very long. Mainly for home practice, there's 4 different parabachi that I use pretty regularly. The main parabachi I use happen to be Western percussion sticks. These are Vic Firth brand drumsticks. The brand doesn't really matter. The beauty of Western drumsticks for taiko home practice is that they are incredibly easy to find. They are cheap, and you can have any number of different variables that you want. You can find drumsticks that are longer or shorter or more dense or less dense, that have plastic or wooden tips. These are more spherical. You can get some that are more oval. There's some that taper more or less. You'll find a pair that you like, and odds are they're going to be cheap. So why do I use these instead of actual bachi, whether it's shime bachi or oaks or whatever? Because in general, when I'm playing taiko at home, I'm not taking full-on heavy-duty strikes and hitting as hard as I can, because the drum pads just can't endure that. So if I'm not going to go full force, I'm mostly working on technique. And these are what I find technique is just fine for. If I'm more concerned about the hitting surface and I don't want to use the little nubs at the end, then I flip them, and I've got the same kind of rounded surface that you would have with any other actual bachi that you have. But in general, the difference between playing like this and say shime bachi is negligible. And the technique that I am improving by playing with Western drumsticks translates 100% to actual bachi. Another really important factor is that I have no sentimental attachment to these, and they're cheap. If termites ate one and the other one exploded, okay, I just go buy another pair. Wouldn't really matter. Compared to the bachi that I have made myself, you know, that I got dowels and I spent time sanding, I would be sad if something happened to them. And they do, and I do get sad. Or even the ones that I buy, they tend to be more expensive than a pair of Western drumsticks, and it hurts to lose them or have them broken. But a pair of Western drumsticks, get another one. That's a small but important factor. Moving on to the next pair, these are really common on sites like Amazon. I've never seen them in a music store or a taiko store. It's essentially a light piece of wood with a very large taper at the end and tennis grip tape all the way to the bottom. Now the tape starts to come loose. I've got some packing tape around this one because the grip on the tape lost its grip. But for, easy playing, especially something like shime, the lightness and the taper is actually really good. I would never, ever, ever perform with them. And similar to the Western drumsticks, if anything happened to these, so what? They come in neat colors. I'm not really recommending them, but they're decent for practice. Now, when I'm playing katsugi okedo or okedo in general, I'm using okedo bachi. These are lighter, they're smaller, they're less dense, they will dent much easier. So I tend to not use them on drum pads or anything that's a harder surface. I couldn't tell you where I got these, but if you are playing Katsugi Okero especially, you're going to want a smaller pair of bachi that probably you're not using for anything else. And finally, my regular bachi, which are extra long because I'm extra long. But I'm not using these to strike or hit anything for my home practice. Instead, I'm doing stuff like that. It's fun to do, it's great for dexterity and training, but if I'm going to do any sort of trick while I'm actually playing, I need to be practicing with the actual bachi that I'm doing it with. And now we get to the third category, which is everything that wasn't in the first two categories, the miscellaneous stuff. We'll start with what I have said is one of the most important pieces of equipment a taiko player can use for home practice, and I've said it in many of my videos. A metronome. Whether it's a physical or a digital app, whichever one you use, you have to have them if you truly want to get better at taiko. Personally, I prefer a metronome that I can touch, that is tangible. This you would consider a digital metronome, but terms get confusing because this is digital, it's an app. This is digital, it's tangible, whatever. I prefer one I can touch. The brand and model that I recommend is the Boss Dr. Beat. This is the DB30 metronome. I've had a couple of different Dr. Beats, different models, and I recommend them. Every single one I've had has worked really, really well. It's portable, it's durable for the size and price, very simple to use, but it has all the features a taiko player is going to want. It gives you quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes, upbeat eighth notes. It's got the swung triplet or dongo as well as the regular triplet, and you have a couple of preset clave patterns, which I never use, but it's cool to have. A really cool feature it has for the odd meters is, let's say I want a meter of 7. It'll give me a high-pitched beep on the 1 and then 6 low beeps for the next 6 notes. Or I can have it do 3 and 4 or 4 and 3. So it can pick the flavor of the 7 I want, and it does that for the other odd meters as well. Nothing mind-blowing. I'm not paying a ton of money for it, so I'm not expecting a lot out of it, but for what I've paid, it is way more than its money's worth. As for a digital app, I don't have a recommendation. I've downloaded just, I think, 2, and the last one I downloaded was fine, so I stopped looking for more. It's called Metronome Beats. One thing it does have that I've not used a lot, but I like, is that you can have it slowly crescendo or decrescendo over time. Or it can count in before it starts to actually beep. Little things like that are actually really cool, and this is the free version. The paid version has a lot more features. But again, for most taiko players practicing at home, you're just going to want a meter and a tempo and to be able to hear it cleanly. Speaking of the phone, this is one of the most powerful tools a taiko player can use in their home practice arsenal, because you can record yourself and you can watch yourself, and there's a lot to learn from watching yourself. You develop your own sense of critical eye. You can see what's working, what's not working. You can see how you've improved if you're watching past videos. There's no reason to not record yourself. And that's one of the reasons why I tend not to prefer using the digital app version of the metronome, because I can't have a metronome going and record myself at the same time. Even if I could, the beeping of the metronome is going to get in the way of what I'm playing. So if nothing else comes of this video, make sure you have a metronome and you're using the phone's capability to record yourself when you practice at home. The next piece of equipment is really obvious, but it's also really worth mentioning. A pen and paper. You can use a pencil, but something to scribble down ideas. You could be practicing, you could be brushing your teeth, whatever it is. The ability to just stop and write down an idea, whether it's a pattern or a movement or solo idea, is really, really valuable. You can, of course, have your camera phone out and record, playing some kind of pattern or doing some kind of movement. I do that as well. But sometimes I just need to have a physical and visual representation, something abstract, and drawing notes and things that recording just can't capture. So make sure you have these handy. Let's talk about stands. If you have drum pads, or the Taiko-1 or Tabor Taiko, whatever you're using to play, what are you going to put it on? Is what you put it on going to be a good height for you, or are you going to adjust to that height? For me, especially with my main drum pad, I wanted something I could tailor exactly to the height I wanted to play at, because I would be using it for years and years and years and years. I didn't want to adjust to it. I wanted it to adjust to me. And so, the snare stand. Now, I knew back then exactly what I know now about Western percussion hardware, and that's zero. Even when I was taking Western percussion classes in college, I moved things around, but I never had to set anything up. But it doesn't really matter. If I have a drum pad large enough, like the one I've been using, all the snare stand has to do is clamp onto the head, like it's doing here, and be able to be raised and lowered at whatever height I want. That's all I need, and that's what it does. But there was one thing I realized that some, maybe most snare stands can do, and that's switching from beta, or upright, to naname. The issue though is once you drop it to naname, you're also dropping the height significantly, and for someone of my size, that's a potential issue. So I looked to see if there were versions of snare stands that were taller, and there actually are tall snare stands, and this is one of them. The brand here is Griffin, and I can't tell you how tall it gets and how low it goes. You can do your research online though and figure out. The important thing though is that you've got a stand that's going to tailor to the height that fits you, and if it does go to naname, that gives you a second option, a second way to play, and adds to the usefulness of the stand. I cannot recommend enough getting yourself a snare stand if you've got a drum pad large enough for it to grip onto. And heck, you can see in some of the videos in the last couple of months when I was injured and I had to sit while playing, I tilted it this way, sat in front of it, and played it head on. So there's a lot you can do aside from just beta and naname. It provides a lot of use. Now I've done a whole video on this next section, so I'm going to go through it pretty quickly, but I'm talking about wrist, hand, and finger strengthening equipment. In addition to doing things like, pumping iron to develop the biceps or tricep stretches and whatnot, you can also do things like grip strengthening, which again, I demonstrate in the video I'm going to mention. And then this is your little gyroscope, little gyro ball. You get it going, you work on the spinning, and it really, really works your wrist strength. Now the thing here isn't so much that I'm training to develop bulk. Bulk is not something that taiko players can get a lot of use out of. This is primarily for injury prevention. Yes, it's going to help you play longer, maybe play more relaxed, but if you're planning to play for years and years and years, or if you don't know how long you're going to play, whatever, this is the kind of stuff that's going to allow you to do it safely. For this last section, I'm going to talk specifically about Taiko-1 accessories, what I have, what I use, what I don't. If you're not interested in the Taiko-1 part, you can fast forward to the time code here, but you might as well stick around. Maybe it'll give you some ideas. This is a regular Okedo stand. If you're going to play the Taiko-1 beta or upright, it's nice to have a stand to rest it on. Now, because the Taiko-1 is not a regular taiko, it's electronic, if you rest it on the floor, it's not going to dampen the sound or the vibration because there aren't any vibrations. But the floor or whatever you put it on may not be an ideal height. With a stand, you have some leeway because of the way that the straps are made to adjust the height to be at an ideal height for your playing. And because the Taiko-1 is something that you could theoretically perform with, it's nice to have a stand to do that. So I highly recommend, if you have the resources, to get yourself a nice stand, and that way you can practice it upright at a height that works for you. Here we have different accessories for the Taiko-1. Some of them I still use, some of them I don't use anymore. Let's find out which is which. We'll start here with the drum amp. Now the best way to hear what you're playing on the Taiko-1 is with headphones, but sometimes you don't want to wear them for whatever reason, and you're going to have to use an amp. Now the internet will correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm sure I will be, but from my very limited knowledge and memory of looking all this up when I was first buying this, you have your guitar amps and you have your drum amps. There might be others. A drum amp is going to capture your highs and lows that your percussion tends to give you, and a guitar amp covers more of the mid-range. So while you don't need a drum amp, if you have a guitar amp, it will work, but a drum amp will make the Taiko-1 sound as good as it's going to get. Now you do need to get a cable for this. Depending on what you want, you can get different lengths. You figure out what hole it goes in, you turn it on, and you're good to go. There's knobs in the front that you really don't have to play much with. There's the ability to put a microphone in this one if you wanted. But in general, this is a very bare bones amp, and for most taiko players, that's all you need. This is a pair of a wireless guitar, transmitter, and receiver, and it works the same way that it works with the Taiko-1. I plug the transmitter into the Taiko-1 itself, I plug the receiver into the amp, and that eliminates the need for having a cable like I just talked about. And because you also can use the Taiko-1 battery powered, that's another cable or cord you won't need, so you can be completely free and move around however you want. The learning curve for this was pretty small. It is a little bit, but in general it makes sense. Make sure you get the right one in the right place, pick the channel so that they're talking to each other, and you're good to go. The weight of these is very negligible. I thought, oh, this might add to the weight of the Taiko-1. No, it doesn't add to the weight or the bulk. It tucks and folds in very nicely, so I highly recommend getting a pair of these yourself. The brand for this is the X-Vive or Vive U2 transmitter. I can't tell you if these are better or worse than any other pair, but they work pretty well for me. And the nice thing is, from my understanding, if you have one transmitter, you can have multiple receivers. So you can have it in 2 different amps, or you can have 2 transmitters and 1 receiver, whatever. You can combine them, but it's good to have an initial pair to start off. Next up, you have our foot pedal. And a foot pedal is a great idea. This one is very simple. It's got an A pedal and a B pedal. So if I'm on sound bank 1 and I want to switch to sound bank 5, I have to pre-program it to begin with, but then boop, it's on 5, boop, it's on 1 with the press of the foot. Very, very cool. And even though there's got a lot of ideas and options up here, it's pretty simple. Again, I plug one in, I tell it what I want it to do, and it does it. However, I don't use it. I really don't use it for taiko practice. If I was more into the compositional and maybe more experimental and doing a lot more with the Taiko-1, I would use this more often, but I just found myself not really using it. When I'm practicing on the Taiko-1, I'm practicing taiko technique, not so much switching between sound banks or other sorts of experimentation. So a good idea, and it was fun to use, but I'm just not using it. And finally, the looper. I did not enjoy practicing with this. I did not enjoy trying to figure out how to make it work. It was a pain in the butt. And I don't know if it was this model or this particular looper and the model is okay. I just got a crappy one. I looked online, I watched YouTube videos and tutorials. They made it look super easy. I just could not get it to work well. And it got to the point where I just stopped wanting to get it to work well. And I think the idea of looping could be really, really fun, especially again for composition or performance. If you're able to use this well in a performance, you can have a lot of fun. I just couldn't get it to work, and it kind of burned me out of wanting to try to use it more. So I don't recommend it, but if it's something that you're into and you have an aptitude for hardware, electronic hardware, go for it. See if you have better luck than me. So for Taiko-1 home practice, I highly recommend an amp. You can have a speaker, it's just not going to cut it. I highly recommend having a pair of the wireless transmitter and receivers. Even if you don't move that far away and you can keep it plugged in, it's nice to have the option. They're not that expensive and they're kind of fun. But as for the other stuff, I wish you the best of luck. I just did not have fun and I am not using them anymore. But I know there are people out there who use this kind of equipment and use it well, and have fun and have luck with it. So please, if you're doing that, continue to do it. And I would love to see more examples of that online for the Taiko-1 community. And that's the equipment that I use and don't use. I hope it inspired you, gave you some ideas. Maybe you have some of the stuff already and you just haven't thought about maybe how to use it differently. Whatever the case, I hope you found this video useful. I would love to know what equipment you use, equipment you don't use for whatever reason, and the kind of equipment you would like to have. Let me know in the comments below. Let the community hear your thoughts. And until next time, keep on practicing and be well.